Hi everyone. So we are back for part 3. It was starting to get really interesting yesterday to see all the statements that the Macrons are taking issue with, not just in the series that Candace Owens put, Becoming Brigitte, but also where she's talked on other people's platforms, etc. So we are now getting to some interesting points in this lawsuit. However, we are still only about halfway through it, after 4 hours in total of reading. So I think this is going to take another two 2 hour sessions, maybe less than 2 hours for episode 4. But I intend to kind of go for about 2 hours tonight and get as far ahead as possible. Okay. So without further ado, let's go straight into it. And again, I'll do my best with any French names and places. I do not do good with French. All right. Owens' false statements and their reasonably foreseeable republication have harmed the Macrons' reputations. Owens' false and defamatory accusations and implications have caused and continue to cause substantial and irreparable damage to the Macrons. Owens' defamatory accusations and implications were widely circulated. Indeed, on February 17th, 2025, defendants posted the level of engagement they had had on YouTube, calling it a record for us, largely due to the series. Okay. Owens boasted about the widespread reach of the series. In Defendant's March 17th episode, Owens stated, "Now look at the series, Becoming Brigitte, everywhere. And the implications are they're far-reaching. I want you guys to be clear. This is not just viral in France, viral in America, viral in the UK. The story is even viral in Russia. People are now considering it as part of their political dialogue and analysis, judging Emmanuel Macron's current actions because the world is finding out about the person who groomed him." Owens stated that the series was already viral in the West when we did this. Now it's viral in the East Hemisphere as well. Owens further claimed that the series was being reported on in Asia and the Middle East. Since the filing of this lawsuit, Owens has continued to shamelessly promote the series and its false and defamatory claims to her global audience. As recently as September 22nd, 2025, Owens boasted about the incredible year she's had with her viewers, encouraging them to go and watch the Becoming Brigitte series. "I think a lot of people have been hooked on that. It's a really good one and she's a dude." Owens' continued promotion of the series and its false and defamatory claims about the Macrons have worsened and compounded the reputational harm they have already endured. As discussed above, the series and its defamatory accusations have been recirculated by other media outlets and podcasters, reaching a massive global audience. The reputational harm to the Macrons is demonstrated by, among other things, numerous republications of Owens's false claims that have been repeated and echoed defendants' false and defamatory accusations, thereby showing that the people who heard and read defendants' false and defamatory statements about the Macrons believe them. Defendants' defamatory accusations caused numerous individuals who heard or read them, both those who held the Macrons in high regard and those who otherwise would have, as well as those with no awareness or opinion of the Macrons, to view them with contempt, to hold them in low regard, and to avoid associating or doing business with them, and to encourage others to avoid associating or doing business with them as well. The Macrons have publicly discussed the emotional harm they have suffered as a result of the conspiracy theories. At an international International Women's Day event in Paris in February 2024, President Macron told reporters that the worst thing is the false information and fabricated scenarios. People eventually believe them and disturb you, even your intimacy. Dependents, by amplifying these conspiracies on a global scale and by purveying even more intimate and even more heinous theories of their own, have greatly exacerbated that harm. In an interview on August 19, 2025, President Macron further explained the effect dependents' false and defamatory claims have had on the Macrons. President Macron stated, "The false claims have become so widespread in the United States that we have to react. This is about upholding the truth. We're talking about the marital status of the First Lady of France, a wife, a mother, a grandmother." President Macron's statements underscore the Macron's damages flow directly from dependent statement. As a result of the false and defamatory accusations and implications published by defendants, the Macron's reputations have been impugned. As a result of the false and defamatory accusations and implications published by defendants, the Macron's relationships with other members of the government, potential political allies, and others have been undermined. As a result of the false and defamatory accusations and implications published by the defendants, confidence in the Macron's integrity and fitness as political and governmental leaders has been undermined. In view of the foregoing, the Macrons are entitled to actual, presumed, and punitive damages in an amount to be specifically determined at trial. Count 1. Defamation. Introduction episode. Plaintiffs repeat and allege paragraphs 1 through 304 as if set forth fully herein. Defendants published the following false and defamatory statements of fact on January 31st, 2025 during the introduction episode of the series, which defendants published on CandaceOwens.com, etc., etc., known as the statements. Brigitte Macron's alleged brother, who I believe Brigitte Macron is, and guys, by the way, you should know that there is this strange case of what happens to every journalist who tries to touch the story. First and foremost, Isabella Ferreira, I think, mentioned this on a past episode. People who began prodding into the story as an independent journalist happened upon some huge information pertaining to the relationship of Emmanuel Macron and Brigitte. But then she was found dead. She was found dead, floating in a river, and her friends said that she didn't kill herself. But the media said she most definitely did that. There have been people who have been so concerned about our safety and stuff. We did up on security for this time being, after getting the letter from Macron, because of things that we know about their network and things that are happening. Like I said to every journalist that has tried to get this out, we are taking that seriously, but also know that at the end of the day, it's not in the security's hands. It is in God's hands. And so we just ask everyone, whether you believe it or not, to just pray. The statements are of and concerning President and Mrs. Macron. Indeed, defendants repeatedly identified President and Mrs. Macron by name, including in and in connection with the statements. The statements are statement of false fact and are reasonably understood as statements of false fact, specifically as assertions that Mrs. Macron has engaged in identity theft, has lied about her identity, and has perpetrated or directed physical violence against any individual for investigating or reporting on her, including Owens and Isabella Ferreira. The statements are categorically and demonstrably false. Mrs. Macron was born a woman named Brigitte Trogneux. She has never lied about her identity, and she has never perpetrated or directed physical violence against any individual for investigating or reporting on her and President Macron, including Owens or Isabella Pereira. The statements are statements of false fact and are reasonably understood as statements of false fact, specifically as assertions that President and Mrs. Macron have lied about Mrs. Macron's identity and have perpetrated or directed physical violence against any individual for investigating or reporting on them, including Owens and Isabella Pereira. The statements are categorically and demonstrably false. President and Mrs. Macron have not lied about Mrs. Macron's identity and have not perpetrated or directed physical violence against any individual for investigating or reporting on them, including Owens or Isabella Pereira. Right. The statements are defamatory, and people who heard them understood them to be defamatory because they hold President and Mrs. Macron up to public hatred, contempt, ridicule, or disgrace, and tend to harm President and Mrs. Macron's reputations as to lower them in the estimation of the community or to deter third persons from associating or dealing with them, including by accusing President and Mrs. Macron of identity theft, lying to the public about Mrs. Macron's identity, perpetrating abuses of power, and engaging in physical violence towards individuals investigating them. The statements are defamatory per se, and people who heard them understood them to be defamatory per se because, without reference to extrinsic evidence and viewed in their plain and obvious meaning, they accuse President and Mrs. Macron of crimes, including identity theft, forgery, fraud, and murder, cast aspersions on their integrity, undercut their reputations, and have the likely effect of harming them. Defendants knew the substantial danger of injury to President and Mrs. Macron and their reputations from the statements, which is readily apparent, and in fact intended to cause injury to President and Mrs. Macron by making the statements. For the reasons set forth in detail above, defendants made the defamatory statements with actual malice, including with actual subjective awareness of their falsity, as evidenced by the fact that defendants A. made the statements despite having actual knowledge that they were false, including based on evidence in their possession and available to them that they actually reviewed. B. relied on sources who were obviously biased against President and Mrs. Macron and whom defendants knew to be biased against President and Mrs. Macron. C. made the statements as part of a preconceived narrative that President and Mrs. Macron have lied to the public about Mrs. Macron's identity, perpetrated abuses of power, and engaged in physical violence towards individuals investigating them. D. deliberately ignored voluminous evidence in their possession and available to them as detailed above that contradicted the preconceived narrative that they wanted to tell about President and Mrs. Macron. E. made the statements for the purpose of generating and obtaining media attention for themselves and their business to enrich themselves at the expense of the truth. F. refused to retract the statements even after being confronted with additional evidence of their falsity. And G. continued to repeat the statements and similar statements since the filing of this action, including on the Tucker Carlson show, the Candace podcast, Becoming Bridget Season 2, and X. Defendants had no applicable privilege or legal authorization to publish the statements, or if they did, they abused that privilege or authorization. As a direct and proximate result of defendants' false statements, President and Mrs. Macron have suffered substantial economic damages, including, among other things, loss of future business opportunities and such other compounding and growing losses as will be shown at trial. As a direct and proximate result of defendants' false statements, President and Mrs. Macron have suffered substantial reputational damage and have had to spend considerable sums of money to correct the public record about their actions and mitigate the reputational harm they have suffered, including costs incurred in hiring legal counsel to clear their name in the court of public opinion. Defendants published the statements maliciously, willfully, wantonly, with common law malice, with actual malice, with a conscious, reckless, and willful indifference to President and Mrs. Macron's rights, and with a desire to cause injury to President and Mrs. Macron. Accordingly, punitive damages are appropriate. In view of the foregoing, President and Mrs. Macron are entitled to actual, presumed, and punitive damages in amounts to be specifically determined at trial. Count 2. False light. Introduction episode. Plaintiffs repeat and allege paragraphs 1 through 304 as if set forth fully therein. Defendants published the following false statements of fact on January 31st, 2025, during the introduction of the series, which defendants published on all these places known as the statements. A. Brigitte Macron's alleged brother, who I believe Brigitte Macron is. B. And guys, by the way, you should know that there's a strange case of what happens to every journalist who tries to touch a story. I think these are the same statements, actually. Yeah, these are the same statements, so I won't read them, right? So this is now, so defamation on these three statements from the introductory episode. This is false light for the same statements. So there is a bit of difference between defamation and false light. I will go through that if I have time. I have covered it in the Lively Wayfarer case. Actually, you know what? We'll just, I've got my ex post up, actually. We can just do it now, because I put it in this easy to read. So defamation versus false light, invasion of privacy. Defamation impacts the reputation of the individual or business. The statement needs only to be made to one other person. If the person is a public figure, actual malice needs to be proven. Public figures do not need to prove actual malice, just negligence. The standard of reckless disregard for the truth can go towards actual malice in the case of public figures. There is no requirement for the statement to be offensive. Truth is always a defense to defamation. And because I was obviously talking about Lively Wayfarer, New York and California both recognize defamation as a cause of action, but so does Delaware, which is where I believe that the Macrons have filed their case. False light, invasion of privacy. False light is the invasion of the privacy of the individual or business. The statement needs to be made to a wider audience. So California case, Kirby against Hal Roach Studios, identified that an audience of 1,000 people was a significantly wide audience. So there's no doubt there that, you know, this is that Candace made her statements to a very wide audience. There is no difference in the requirement to prove actual malice for either public or private figures. The person making the claim must show that the person who made the statement must be shown to know that the statement put the individual or business in false light, or that they acted with reckless disregard for the truth. The statement needs to be offensive to a reasonable person, and I think, again, all these requirements are being met. Truth is only a defense if both the statement and its implications are true. And then obviously again, California recognizes false light as a cause of action. New York does not. I was obviously talking about Wayfarer, Lively Wayfarer. I believe Delaware does recognize false light. All right, so let's go back to the complaint. The statements are of and concerning President and Mrs. Macron. Indeed, defendants repeatedly identified President and Mrs. Macron by name, including in and in connection with the statements. The statements are statements of false fact and are reasonably understood as statements of false fact, specifically as assertions that Mrs. Macron has engaged in identity theft, lied about her identity, and has perpetrated or directed physical violence against any individual for investigating or reporting on her, including Owens and Isabella Pereira. The statements are categorically and demonstrably false. Mrs. Macron was born a woman named Brigitte Trogneux and has never lied about her identity, and she has never perpetrated or directed physical violence against any individual for investigating or reporting on them, including Owens or Isabella Pereira. The statements are statements of false fact and are reasonably understood as statements of false fact, specifically as assertions that President and Mrs. Macron have lied about Mrs. Macron's identity and have perpetrated or directed physical violence against any individual for investigating or reporting on them, including Owens and Isabella Pereira. The statements are categorically and demonstrably false. President and Mrs. Macron have not lied about Mrs. Macron's identity and have not perpetrated or directed physical violence against any individual for reporting on them, including Owens or Isabella Pereira. By publishing the statements, defendants have portrayed President and Mrs. Macron in a false light because they accuse President and Mrs. Macron of crimes, including identity theft, forgery, fraud, murder, cast aspersions on their integrity, undercut their reputations, and have the likely effect of harming them. The false light created by defendants would be highly offensive to a reasonable person because they hold President and Mrs. Macron up to public hatred, contempt, ridicule, or disgrace, and tend to harm President and Mrs. Macron's reputations as to lower them in the estimation of the community or to deter third persons from associating or dealing with them, including by accusing President and Mrs. Macron of identity theft, lying to the public about Mrs. Macron's identity, perpetrating abuses of power, and engaging in physical violence against individuals investigating them. Defendants knew the statements would create a false impression about President and Mrs. Macron and intended to cause injury to President and Mrs. Macron by making the statements. For the reasons set forth in detail above, defendants made the defamatory statements with actual malice, including with actual subjective awareness of the falsity as evidenced by the facts that defendants. And we have read these actually already. Defamation. Defendants had no applicable privilege or legal authorization to publish the statements and result in false impression, or if they did, they abused that privilege or authorization. As a direct and proximate result of defendants' false statements, President and Mrs. Macron have suffered substantial economic damages, including, among other things, loss of future business opportunities and other such compounding and growing losses, as will be shown at trial. As a direct and proximate result of defendants' statements and resulting false impression, President and Mrs. Macron have suffered substantial reputational damage and have had to spend considerable sums of money to correct the public record about their actions and mitigate the reputational harm they have suffered, including costs incurred in hiring legal counsel to clear their name in the court of public opinion. Defendants published the statements maliciously, willfully, wantonly, with common law malice, with actual malice, with a conscious, reckless, and willful indifference to President and Mrs. Macron's rights, and with a desire to cause injury to President Macron and Mrs. Macron, Accordingly, punitive damages are appropriate. In view of the foregoing, President and Mrs. Macron are entitled to actual, presumed, and punitive damages in amounts to be specifically determined at trial. So I'm not going to read all of this stuff now because this is all on the introduction episode. They are just different counts. I didn't get this far when I was reading the lawsuit, so I thought there would be something different, but it's not. They are the same three statements. They're just different counts that they are claiming. They may not get all of them. So we have defamation, we have false light, we have defamation by implication. So yeah, same statements. Obviously, these particular paragraphs are just, it is not disputed. This is a statement, a false statement of fact, a statement of false fact. That President and Mrs. Macron lied about their identity, etc., or perpetrated physical violence. The implications are categorically and demonstrably false. The implications are defamatory per se, etc. So, but they are essentially, Candace Owens would have known the substantial danger of injury, and then for the reasons set above, which is the same thing we see in all the others. So they are saying the same thing for the same statements. These are just different counts. So here, this is defamation for episode 1. I'll read the defamation or whatever the first count is for each episode to see what statements are, etc., and what is said. But if they all look the same for the same count, for the same episode and same statements, I won't read everything again and repeat myself. I'll just read the actual count. So this is count 4. It's defamation, but it's for episode 1 this time. Plaintiffs repeat and allege paragraphs 1 through to 304 as if set forth fully herein. Defendants published the following false and defamatory statements of fact on February 4th, 2025 during episode 1 of the series, which defendants published here, and here. A. I literally told you that every journalist that tries to touch this story, something happens to. Okay, and it is a fact that Isabella Ferrer was working on the story, had messaged, according to her friend, saying that she had a bombshell about Emmanuel Macron, and appreciate the French press had reported on this. So, one bit of evidence that the Macrons could go for is these messages that were allegedly sent by Isabella Ferrer to her friends. And then when she was found dead floating in a river, or a pond, whichever it was, and the public said that she had drowned, and her friend said that she was not suicidal, and the press said that she had maybe taken some pills, I don't remember. I don't love trying to read a quote from Candace Owens. She talks incredibly fast, and it sounds a bit kind of word salady when I'm reading it. I feel like I'm talking in a word salad, because it comes out very fast. So she kind of is a bit jumpy. B. Like I said, every journalist that tries to get this out, yes, that is not a lie. That is the truth. We have upped our security because we were responding to the chat. People saying, get yourself some good security. And of course, when you have people walking around your property and you have young children and you understand the extent of the stakes that are in this, getting and upping on your security, that is my right. C. I believe Brigitte Macron was born a biological male, and then transitioned into a female. That is my belief. I don't know how many times I can say it. D. And you will never, ever get me to transform my opinion that you were groomed by the person you eventually married in 2007, Brigitte Macron. I believe she's a man. Okay, the statements are of and concerning President and Mrs. Macron. Indeed, defendants repeatedly identified President and Mrs. Macron by name, including in and in connection with the statements. The statements are statements of false fact and are reasonably understood as statements of false fact, specifically as assertions that Mrs. Macron has engaged in identity theft, lied about her identity, perpetrated or directed physical violence against individuals investigating or reporting on President Macron or herself, including Owens or Isabella Pereira. The statements are categorically and demonstrably false. Mrs. Macron was born a woman named Brigitte Trogneux, has not lied about her identity, has not perpetrated or directed physical violence against any individual for investigating or reporting on President Macron or herself, including Owens or Isabella Pereira. The statements are statements of false fact and are reasonably understood as statements of false fact, specifically as assertions that President and Mrs. Macron have lied about Mrs. Macron's identity and perpetrated or directed physical violence against individuals investigating or reporting on them, including Owens or Isabella Pereira. The statements are categorically and demonstrably false. President and Mrs. Macron have not lied about Mrs. Macron's identity or perpetrated or directed physical violence against any individual for investigating or reporting on them, including Owens or Isabella Pereira. The statements are defamatory, and people who heard them understood them to be defamatory because they hold President and Mrs. Macron up to public hatred, contempt, ridicule, or disgrace, and tend to harm President and Mrs. Macron's reputations as to lower them in the estimation of the community, or to deter third persons from associating or dealing with them, including by accusing President and Mrs. Macron of identity theft, lying to the public about Mrs. Macron's identity, perpetrating abuses of power, and engaging in physical violence against individuals who are investigating them. The statements are defamatory per se, and people who heard them understood them to be defamatory per se. Because without reference to extrinsic evidence and viewed in their plain and obvious meaning, they accuse President and Mrs. Macron of crimes, including identity theft, forgery, fraud, and murder, cast aspersions on their integrity, undercut their reputations, and have the likely effect of harming them. Defendants knew the substantial danger of injury to the President and Mrs. Macron and their reputations from the statements, which is readily apparent, and in fact intended to cause injury to the Macrons by making the statements. I'm not going to read this because this is now all the same as well. Okay, so we'll just go through the actual counts, and I think because everything else after it is the same. The only thing it changes is, the episode that the Macrons are talking about and the statements that they are alleging. So, this is again episode 1. This is false light. So we won't read that because it is identical. Count 6, defamation by implication, also episode 1, also the same, same statements. Oh, we might not need a 4th episode, finally. So this is count 7, defamation. It's episode 2, February the 5th. So I will just read the statements. It's all the same except for the statements. There's one statement. He turned to his wife to know what to answer about his sister. I don't know about how you guys are feeling right now, but I'm starting to get a little icky feeling. It's all starting to feel a bit, I don't know, incestuous to me. So that is the statement for episode 2. All the same. Sorry, I'm having a nightmare here with which one is that? Okay, yeah, so that was count 7. That was defamation for episode 2. False light for episode 2 is the same statement. And then we have let me just check. Yeah, so there's no defamation by implication for episode 2. We then go into count 9, defamation for episode 3. All the same, but the statements are: A, we showed you the side-by-side of current President Emmanuel Macron and a person who was supposed to be Brigitte's nephew, his wife's nephew. But these two people who are not supposed to be in any way related look way too much alike. B, what really happened to Andre Louis, who was cremated very quickly, even though his daughter says he was buried? What really happened to Andre Louis? Did he actually die? Did he escape with the assistance of the Elysee Palace? Did he try to escape, but the Elysee Palace intervened? C, there is no conspiracy here. The MK Ultra was real. The government was obsessed with all of these different programs. Really, the main point of them trying to condition the brain, trying to brainwash people, sometimes through isolation, which it sounds like Emmanuel Macron spent a ton of time isolated throughout his childhood. I mean, he's acknowledging that he lived through bugs, and his friends are acknowledging, or should be friends, are acknowledging that he was kind of a loner and on his own. So they would experiment psychologically through isolation, through drugs, LSD, drugging people to see if they could get them to commit crimes or to commit other acts unwittingly, essentially trying to establish a Manchurian candidate. So we don't know just how global that program went. We don't know every element of that program. And one element of that program was, of course, sexual perversions, like committing a sexual assault in order to then establish how it impacts somebody's psyche. Truly evil stuff. Okay, earlier I told you that Macron's alleged biological parents, you see up here on the screen, had some interesting jobs just off the bat. His father, Jean-Michel Macron, was a psychiatrist, and yes, of course, we know for a fact that psychiatrists have done some evil things, some very evil things throughout the years. And then the rest is largely the same. Count 10, false light. Also episode 3, same statements. Count 11 is, sorry, I'm losing my voice. Defamation by implication. That's also episode 3, same statements. Count 12, defamation, episode 4. Okay, so the statements involved in here is A, today is Jean-Michel Trogneu's birthday. In other words, happy birthday, Brigitte Macron, the First Lady, Brigitte Macron. B, Macron's immediate family was involved in helping people who had gender issues to become someone else. In other words, they were facilitating the issuing of real government IDs, which allowed people to legally shed themselves of their former identities and their true biological sex. We have to wake up to the fact that this is the reality of the world that we live in today. So what are the implications of that? C, but what we can't tell you is what exactly happened to Andre Louis Ozier. We cannot ascertain what happened to him based on the testimony of his first cousin, because it depends on whether or not you believe his partner, the woman who was at his funeral, who claimed that she found tickets to Africa in his pocket, that he had emptied all of his bank accounts. And if you potentially, or you could say, and if you believe the journalist from Paris Match, who then wrote that Andre actually spent the last days of his life in a psychiatric ward being guarded by none other than Alexander Benalla. D. With forgery, extortion, and most importantly, with access to a woman who can facilitate the changing of identities, it is not enough for any person investigating this case to ask questions like, is this Brigitte Trogneux at the wedding, in the wedding interview? In the wedding photo. God, this is such a lot. Just need to make this bigger as well. Right, there we go. E. Because we can confirm that is indeed a photo of a woman named Brigitte Trogneux in that wedding photo where that Brigitte is. We cannot confirm because the First Lady refuses to answer. She has a mother-in-law who helps transgender people get new identities. So you have to essentially understand that you can just take somebody's name. You can become somebody else at a moment's notice. Now, legally, when you become transgender, okay? This brings us to Jean-Michel Trogneux. F. If it's really you, Brigitte Macron, and you didn't take on the identity of your sister, if it's really you. G. The only question that remains is who the hell is Brigitte Macron? And the obvious answer to me, and after you see these photos that you are going to see, one in particular from when Jean-Michel Trogneux was 18, you are going to fall down like I did when I saw it. It's completely crazy. H. There is no question upon seeing this technology in my mind that Jean-Michel Trogneux is Brigitte Macron. The only question that I have is what happened to his sister, Brigitte Trogneux. Okay. Alright, so this is all the same. Count 13, False Light, Episode 4, same statements. Count 14, Defamation by Implication, Episode 4, same statements. Now we have count 15, Episode 5, Defamation. The statements. A. This is a good time to tell you that most of what you think you even know about Emmanuel Macron thus far, his legacy. Yeah, it's just objectively not true. Emmanuel had a major hand up in life. This guy's so private we don't know much about him. What we do know about him is, I would say, quite sinister. It's quite sinister. It's making me think, I don't know, of that movie, The Manchurian Candidate. B. Brigitte Macron perhaps is Jean-Michel Trogneux. C. Who are you really and what is your relationship to Emmanuel Macron? What is Emmanuel Macron's relationship to you? What is the relationship between Emmanuel Macron and Jean-Jacques? It's not feeling like a nephew to me. D. He's just a puppet and he has been groomed from that time that he was a child. But groomed by who? Who is his father? Who is his father? He doesn't really seem to have close relations with his parents. Of these, his doctors, perhaps? They can change identities and they can change names. This family has this capacity. E. There are too many similarities between the upbringing of Emmanuel Macron and, as we talked about, the upbringing of Kamala Harris, the upbringing of Barack Obama. You know, these people being raised by their grandparents at a time when we know that the MK Ultra program was running, and there is something very, very wrong there. Okay. So that was count 15. Defamation for episode 5. Count 16, false light, episode 5, for the same statements. Count 17, defamation by implication for episode 5, same statements. Yeah, so we're not going to need a 4th episode, so yeah, this will be the final episode on this particular complaint. I'll then go and see if I can find a response from Candace Owens and continue the story on with there. Count 18, defamation, episode 6. Okay, so the statements, or one statement actually. I think a year from now, most of the world will be awakened to the fact that what I said 1 year ago is true. I believe that Emmanuel Macron is a homosexual man that was groomed from his youth. I believe the individual who groomed him is now his wife. I believe that his wife was born Jean-Michel Trogneux and transitioned in his early 30s, and I believe that the entire state is colluding to protect that secret. And like I said, I would stake my entire professional career on all of those points. And then they talk about an ex-post as well, which says Emmanuel Macron married a man, which was illegal at the time he did it. Also, on February the 18th, an ex-post, why did he send me the legal letter? 1, because Brigitte can still be prosecuted for this crime against a minor up until the end of this year. 2, because his marriage was an illegal act. Emmanuel Macron broke the law when he married his groomer. So, same legal standard. Count 19, false light, episode 6, same statement on the episode and same statements on the ex-posts. Count 20, defamation. This is the epilogue episode, February 20th. The statements. A. I know there are so many lingering questions. Is Brigitte Macron the First Lady of France, Emmanuel Macron's biological father? We're hearing that a lot. Where is the real Brigitte Trogneux? B. Okay, so many of you had suspected that these families might all be related. Are the Oziers, the Trogneux, and the Macrons all just from the same family? Is there a chance that Brigitte Macron, some of you asked, is actually the father of Emmanuel Macron? C. We definitely know and have confirmed, like we did in the last episode, that he had his hand held through his career by David de Rothschild, a family that is known and is on record as having practiced incest. Okay, why and how did Emmanuel Macron get so close to the Rothschilds? So close that his colleague said this dude didn't even know what EBITDA meant, and yet he became the youngest managing partner. We understood that whatever it was David Rothschild was holding his hand, he just couldn't question the power that he was being given, and we would laugh at him in meetings because he knew nothing about finance. Why did David Rothschild see to it that Emmanuel had his hand held? Vice is nice, but incest is best because it stays in the family. That is a direct quote from David Rothschild's cousin, Natalie Reams Rothschild. Then there was a biography which was written by author Natalie Livingston, which was entitled The Women of Rothschild, which sort of revealed the maniacal desire that the Rothschild family had to maintain their fortune and their power in the world. A desire that was so maniacal that they practiced family incest. That is just undeniable. It's a fact. Okay, and allegedly they did this only until it was no longer socially acceptable, right up until the late 19th century. You guys, right before we got into this Trognure family, it's just amazing. D. Yes, I agree with you that are commenting right now that we are looking at potentially at incest. That is what is in my gut. Feels like it has to be a secret so big that it would make them react in this way, because it is a type of violence to treat journalists like this. It is a kind of emotional violence to do these sorts of things, and they do it as though they know that vice is nice, but incest is best, and things should be kept within the family. Also refers to ex-posts with statements, is Brigitte Macron President Macron's father? What happened to the real Brigitte? Standard law. Count 21, false light, for the same statements, both on the epilogue and the ex-post. Count 22, defamation by implication. Again, the epilogue, same statements and same ex-post. Okay. So now we get to the prayer for relief, which is the final part. Wherefore, plaintiffs respectfully request that the court enter judgment in plaintiff's favour and against defendants jointly and severally as follows: awarding the Macrons actual and presumed damages to be specifically determined at trial, awarding the Macrons punitive and or exemplary damages, awarding the Macrons all costs, disbursements, fees and interest as authorised by law, and such other and additional remedies as the court may deem just and proper. And you can see they are requesting a jury trial. I just want to go back to the start because there was something I was going to clear up. There was a comment left on episode 1 where I think someone had maybe misunderstood the situation. So this is where basically the complaint passes out who the defendants are, and obviously, well, the parties. But in this, I'm concentrating on the defendants. There's obviously Candace Owens as an individual. her businesses, Candace Owens LLC, and then there is another business as well. It's called George Tom Inc. Where is it? Is it before there? Right, yes, that's it. There's parties. Here we go. Defendant George Tom Inc. Now, someone thought that they were trying to bankrupt her husband because of this George Tom. Obviously, George Thomas Farmer. I know there's another name in there somewhere. I can't remember it. Okay. No, I can't remember her husband's name. It's not important anyway, right? But defendant George Tom, people assumed that this was her husband's business and that the Macrons were trying to bankrupt her husband. I think that was the actual phrase used. They're trying to bankrupt her husband. No, that's not quite true. Actually, George Tom is a business that is incorporated and operated and controlled entirely by Candace Owens. She has obviously set up a business using her husband's name as, just, her husband is not actually connected to the business, according to public filings. But it does say that Owens is a member or manager of George Tom Inc. and has primary control over George Tom Inc. So, yeah, Owens is a member and the sole manager of dependent Candace Owens LLC. Owens maintains control of dependent George Tom Inc. So it's Star Hell. That's it. So it's actually she controls the company. She operates and manages George Tom Inc. So that's just to clear that up. It's not that they're trying to bankrupt her husband. This is just an entity that happens to have her husband's name in in the name of the business. That may be some kind of, I don't know, like a token of love or like a tribute to her husband, but that does not translate to this business is George Farmer's business and the Macrons are suing him. He is not mentioned as a party in this at all. Okay, so I'm going to that's a very long complaint. It's very, very detailed. It's very well written. I want to see Candace Owens' response to some of these points. And I want to see the evidence she's got because she may well have more than is being portrayed here. I know lawsuits and I know legal filings well enough to know that this is being written in a way by the Macron's counsel in a way that would serve them best. They may not tell the full story, and I'm very open-minded to that. I want to see what else there is, because if it is true, and they have been very thorough, and they have cited episodes for every statement they've made. So they're not just throwing out things out in thin air, and it's not coming from nowhere. They are actually saying, well, actually, she said this. They're pointing to when she said she would present evidence, and then does not. The evidence never materializes. They've done that in quite a detailed way, and then there are links all the way. So I like to think that from a starting perspective, this is very thorough, and they cite evidence for everything, all the statements that they they're kind of, ascribing to Candace Owens. I do hope that Candace Owens has more evidence than the Macrons are saying she has relied on. Because if she does not, I don't think it's enough. I'm not saying that, again, that's not an opinion whether think what she's saying about Brigitte Macron is true or not. I'm saying she needs to have more evidence than be comparing photos. She, or like, a clairvoyant. Journalists who have already been found liable for defamation for these same allegations. There needs to be more than that. And obviously, if she has dismissed evidence or she's been given information or evidence that actually rebuts some of the things that she's saying, and she has deliberately chosen not to present that to her audience, then again, that does actually support what the Macrons are saying, that there's no real genuine interest in the truth at all. So I'm curious to see what Candace Owens says. I'm curious also to read these retraction requests, because if they show that she was actually made aware before she did the Becoming Brigitte series, which she had at least one retraction demand in December, before the month before she started doing the series. And actually, as she, in her own words, according to this lawsuit, she only did the series because she had that retraction demand. But if that retraction demand holds a lot of the information or a lot of evidence that actually counters the allegations that Candace Owens then went on to make in her series, then that's a problem. If Candace Owens has made statements such as, well, they never denied this and they refuse to answer that, and the Macrons have actually answered it in that December retraction demand, then that is a problem. But I need to see the other side of it to kind of weigh and balance it all. This is written very, very, very well, but I expect it to be, because the law firm is one of the best defamation law firms in the world. So, but also this is just one side of the story. And that's what I meant when I said yesterday, like, I've not watched this in advance. So I have no preconceived bias of the story, the statement, or Candace Owens. I've also not looked up anything about the Macrons. I'm not particularly interested in them. I don't know much about them. I haven't actually had a need to look into them at all. So I have no information regarding either side, but I want to look at what the court would look at, what the jury would look at, and make my own decisions. But to be fair here, we've now heard from the Macrons. I think Candace Owens next, and I will probably start that this weekend. Yeah, this maybe Saturday. I'm gonna be doing a few days back to Lively Wayfarer. Thank you for joining. Please do like and subscribe. Helps my channel out an awful lot. Right, have a good evening, guys.